Have you ever wondered what really happens when you defy God? We're exploring the dark and brutal repercussions faced by those who dared to challenge the Almighty. They're filled with wrath, destruction, and lessons about the cost of disobedience. So, brace yourselves as we tackle the demise of 7 biblical figures who were punished by God Himself. 1. Adam and Eve. In the lush, perfect Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve lived in bliss, unaware of suffering or pain. Everything was theirs, except for one off-limits tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But curiosity and a cunning serpent, as Satan himself, led Eve to pluck its forbidden fruit, and Adam followed suit. Their first bite was a direct hit against God's sole command. The consequences were immediate and severe. Suddenly aware and ashamed of their nakedness, they were thrust into a world of pain, toil, and mortality. Childbirth became agonizing for Eve, while Adam was condemned to a life of exhausting labor. This was the shattering of a perfect existence and the birth of human hardship. From then on, every human would know suffering, a perpetual reminder of the cost of that first fatal disobedience. 2. Cain.
A hard-working farmer, and Abel, a dedicated shepherd, were the first children of Adam and Eve. Both brothers made offerings to God, but while Abel's sacrifice was accepted, Cain's was not. Burning with envy and uncontrolled anger, Cain lured his brother into the fields. There, amidst the quiet whispers of nature, Cain committed a horrifying act. He murdered Abel in cold blood. God's punishment was swift and merciless. Cain was cursed to be a fugitive, wandering the earth with a mark that screamed of his vile deed to everyone he met. The ground that absorbed his brother's blood became his eternal curse, refusing to yield its bounty to him. His life became a lonely, endless road of despair, a living embodiment of the price of unchecked rage and envy. 3. The Tower of Babel. In the plains of Shinar, humanity, united in language and purpose, went on a project fueled by sheer arrogance. They began constructing a tower tall enough to reach the heavens, a monument to their own greatness. This tower, a massive structure of bricks and ambition, was a blatant challenge to God's authority. Offended by their pride and defiance, God intervened in a dramatic display of power. He confused their language, turning their unified voices into many that could no longer be understood. The once collaborative builders turned into a chaotic, scattered mob, unable to understand each other. Their grand project was abandoned, a half-built testament to their overreaching pride. The Tower of Babel, meant to be a symbol of human achievement, became a ruin, a stark reminder of the consequences of trying to equal the divine. 4. Sodom and Gomorrah. The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were infamous for their wickedness, places where moral decay and depravity knew no bounds. Their sins were so great that they cried out to heaven, demanding divine retribution. Despite Abraham's pleas for mercy, not even 10 righteous people could be found within their walls. God's response was a terrifying spectacle of justice. He rained down fire and brimstone, turning these bustling hubs of sin into smoldering, lifeless ashes. The once thriving cities were obliterated, their inhabitants consumed by the fiery wrath of God. Lot, Abraham's nephew, barely escaped, but his wife, unable to resist a backward glance, was transformed into a pillar of salt, a permanent, haunting monument. 5. Ramses II. In ancient Egypt, Ramses II faced off against God's will, embodied by Moses, a simple man with a mission. Ramses II's heart was hardened. He refused to free the Israelites, ignoring Moses' warnings. What followed was a series of 10 horrific plagues, each more dreadful than the last. The Nile turned to blood, a ghastly transformation that killed all fish and made the water undrinkable. Frogs swarmed out, infesting homes and rotting in heaps. Then came lice, flies, diseased livestock, boils, hail, locusts, and darkness so thick it could be felt. The final plague was the most horrifying, the death of every firstborn Egyptian son. This last, gruesome plague broke Ramses II's resolve, but it was too late. Egypt lay in ruins, a powerful kingdom brought to its knees by its leader's stubborn defiance. 6. King Saul. King Saul's reign began with promise, but soon spiraled into a dark tale of disobedience and paranoia. Commanded by God to destroy the Amalekites completely, Saul disobeyed, sparing their king and the best livestock. This act of defiance led to his downfall. God rejected Saul as king, a decision that haunted and tormented him. Plagued by a deepening sense of despair, Saul's mental state deteriorated. He became consumed by jealousy and fear, especially towards David, whom he saw as a threat. Saul's once glorious rule turned into a desperate grasp for power, marked by irrational decisions and violent outbursts. His end was as tragic as his reign. In the heat of battle, wounded and hopeless, Saul took his own life, falling on his sword. His lifeless body was then mutilated by his enemies, a gruesome end to a king who had lost God's favor. 7. Judas Iscariot. Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples of Jesus, is synonymous with betrayal. Driven by greed, he struck a deal with the chief priests, agreeing to betray Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. Under the cover of night, in the quiet garden of Gethsemane, Judas led soldiers to Jesus, identifying him with a kiss. This act of treachery set in motion the events leading to Jesus' crucifixion. But Judas's story doesn't end there. Overwhelmed by guilt and despair, he attempted to return the blood money, but the priests refused it. In a final act of desperation, Judas hanged himself, a broken man unable to live with his actions. His body, according to some accounts, fell and burst open, his insides spilling out. It was a grisly end to a man who betrayed the Son of God, a reminder of the destructive power of greed and the heavy burden of remorse. It's clear that the wrath in these stories is not just about punishment. It's a reflection of the darker aspects of human nature. From hardened hearts to betrayal, these stories are etched in time, serving as grim reminders of the consequences of defying morals. Perhaps in these stories, we find not only warnings from the past, but also mirrors reflecting our own struggles and choices. Where does the line between right and wrong blur for us today? And what can we learn from the fates of those who crossed that line in ancient times?